Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kirby video. In this video I want to build a custom block preview together with you. Last time we had a closer look at the blocks field and how to create custom block types, and we used the simple fields preview to edit those blocks, which is totally fine, but it is not on the same level as the built-in rich text editing that we have for our own blocks, for the headline block or for the text block for in this case, where you can instantly click into the text and start editing this, which of course feels a lot more intuitive. And if you want to do that for your own custom block type, you have to invest a bit of work and you have to get into plugin development. For most projects, this might not be necessary. You might totally be happy with the way that you can work with the fields preview just to get to the results pretty quickly and also be able to update them quickly. But for some types or for some projects, you really might want to take it to the next level, or you might want to provide this as a plugin for other Kirby users. So this is what I want to do in this video today. So it's getting a bit more advanced, a bit more technical, but I'm trying to take you through this step by step so you find an easy entrance into this world of block plugins. Let's start first about the concept for our new block. The block type that I want to create for this example is going to be an info box. A typical example would be like a short notice within your text saying something important or something that the user should be aware of, the reader should be aware of. You can find lots of those in our documentation where we have warnings within the text or maybe just some additional information, and this is exactly what I want to do. So let's get started with a custom block type setup, and this is exactly what we did last time. So we define a new type, and this would be info box. And our info box needs a text field, so I can edit a bit of text. So it should be a simple input, a text input. And then we also want to select the type of info that is being shown here. So that would be a select box. And we are going to add a couple options. So the first and default one should be info, and then it would be something like a success box that could be green, for example, to show some, some positive texts. And then there could be a notice box, which then would be orange and show a bit more important or noteworthy text. And then there could also be an alert box that would be red and signify that some really critical information is being displayed here. By setting it up like this, we should already be able to add one to our blocks. So here now we have our new info box, and this is the info text. And we are also going to select a type, so that would be info. And here you go. This is exactly what we had last time, where it's just being shown without additional information. If I double click, I'm ending up in the drawer again, and I can change text here, I can change the type again. Pretty straightforward, but not very visual. And of course, just like last time, we could now switch on the fields preview, and we could also turn it, turn it into what you see is what you get mode. And then we would have this. So now it would be easy to edit this inline, just like we did with the accordion, but it's not an info box. It is just a bunch of fields, and it doesn't look like an info box. And what I want to build now is an info box that looks like an info box and already has the background color that I have in mind, depending on the type, and also has the text that I type in here, directly here in my block preview. So how do we do that? We need to create a plugin, and I haven't done any screencasts on plugins yet, so this is going to be the first one, and it's a bit of a crash course because we are going to cover a couple things in this tutorial here at once. How do we create plugins in Kirby? It's easy. You go to the site folder, and then if you don't have a plugins folder in here already, just create one. And now we need a subfolder for our plugin. And in this case, I want to call it Infobox. Straight, pretty simple. Let's do the rest in here in our editor, because we can add a couple files here to our plugin. This is here. And the first one that I want to add is the index.php. So every plugin needs an index.php, which just is the entry point for Kirby to know, okay, this is what I need to load for this plugin. And it's a simple PHP file. And now I can start telling Kirby that this is my plugin and there are additional parts to this. So I can say, okay, Kirby, this is a plugin. And as a first argument, you have to give it a name. And you start with your own name and then a slash and the name of the plugin. So in my case, if this would turn up into an official plugin for Kirby, I would call it get Kirby and then Infobox. You would probably start with your name here and then Infobox. And then afterwards, we define an array with elements that this plugin will have. They are all documented in our docs, so you can go there and find all the different types of plugins that you can add here now, or the extensions. And there are lots of things that you can extend Kirby with. So for example, you could create your own snippets here, your own templates, block methods, page methods, all kinds of things, hooks that you can use to extend the system in whatever way you want it to extend. And the very first part to this plugin that I'm going to add is our blueprint definition. Because afterwards, I don't really want to add all of this every time I want to use my info box. All I want to do in the end is just list it like all the other ones. I want to be able to do this. And in order to be able to do this, I need to put this somewhere else where Kirby can load it from. And Kirby's block blueprints all go into a blocks subfolder. And we can do this, we can define this kind of block blueprint directly in our plugin. I'm going to show you how to do this. Getting back at the index.php, we want to add a new blueprint. And blueprints are defined in a blueprints subarray. And inside here, we can now say which kind of blueprint we want to add to our plugin. So if we want to add a page blueprint to our plugin, which is also totally possible, we would say, okay, this goes into the pages folder, and then it would maybe be the article plugin. Or if you want to define a user blueprint, we would say users, and then we could say, okay, this is the admin blueprint. But in our case, we want to define a blocks blueprint. So we put it into the blocks subfolder, and our block type is called Infobox. So we use that as well for the name of the blueprint. We don't have to put YAML here because in this case, it's really just about where to put it and what the name of the blueprint is. And afterwards, we can point it to a file, or we can define the blueprint as an array here. But I want to define the blueprint in a separate file. And the most straightforward way to do this is by starting from the current directory. This is a PHP keyword to say, okay, we start from this directory where the index PHP is located. And from here on, I could, for example, put it into a blueprint file. That would be totally valid. If I have multiple blueprints in my plugin, I might want to clean this up some more and put it into a blueprint subfolder. And if I have multiple block blueprints and maybe also user blueprints and page blueprints, I might want to organize this as well again into subfolders here of the blueprints folder. And this is exactly what I'm going to do. I think it's just a good idea to have a clear structure for your plugins, to always know where to look up for certain parts of the plugin. In this case, I call it Infobox YAML. So now Kirby knows that it should load this Infobox blueprint from this path here on my file system. But it does not exist yet, so this is the next part we have to do. We can copy all of this and cut it from here. And I'm going to do this in the editor again. Jump right in here, put a new folder, blueprints, and then inside a new folder, blocks, and inside a new file, info box. Cool. And I can paste this here and outdent it, remove the dash here. So now inside this info box YAML blueprint file, we only store the information for this particular block type. It does not have any other block types in there, so that's why I removed the dash before for it, because this is really just this single block type that I'm defining here. Okay, great. If I did everything correctly, let me check that quickly. We have the blueprints folder, subfolder, and then the info box YAML. Okay, this is great. So now Kirby should be able to load this whenever I tell it in my blocks field that I want to use the info box. And I already did that here. And so for every type, Kirby is looking into blocks and the blocks subfolder, the blueprint subfolder, and trying to load it from there. So theoretically, nothing should actually change. Everything should still work, and it's working. The preview is not working. Maybe I killed it. Yeah, I killed the preview option, so it's no longer showing up, but this is exactly what I wanted. I only need the fields in here because now we are going to build our own preview for it. How do we do that now? We have a PHP file for our blueprint, for our plugin, and this is taking care of all the backend stuff. As I said before, you could also add additional backend methods in here, maybe to create page methods, for example, or define some models or some templates. But we are not taking care of creating extensions for the panel yet. The panel is built in Vue.js, and so we have to provide it with some additional JavaScript code in order to render the block preview. So this would be the next step. This means that our plugin now also needs a JavaScript file in addition to our index.php. Going back to the blueprints folder, I can now add a new index.js, which works pretty much exactly like the index.php. So Kirby would now know, okay, for this plugin there is some JavaScript code available that should be loaded for the panel, and it will then include it. And inside here, we have to tell Kirby that there is additional stuff for the panel. And this looks very similar to what we did just in the index.php. With a panel.plugin, we can define a new plugin for the panel. And I'm going to use the same naming convention that I did for the index.php. And from here on, it's JavaScript code, so there's going to be an object of additional extensions for our for our panel. And one of those options that I could put in this object here is a set of blocks. This is again an object, and for every block that I want to define, I can now start defining a block component inside here. And those components will be Vue.js components. So if you've never worked with Vue.js before, this will be new to you, but I'm trying to keep it simple and take you step by step through those components, because what we are doing here is mostly still understandable for people who work with JavaScript or work with HTML and CSS in your front-end code. So it's not super strange or super weird and nothing like really new to learn. It's just a new way to write things. So what we want to do here now is to define our info box component. Again, this is going to end up as an object. And from here on, it is really a Vue component. So you can get into the Vue documentation and learn from there. It's important though that this is Vue version 2 and not version 3 so far, but the methods and the options that you have are still very similar, and the Vue 2 docs are also still available, so you can look into the Vue documentation to learn more about it. We can start really simple from here on and just start with a template. This would be the most basic way to render a Vue component, to give it a template option here. Template. Okay, what is a template? A template is just HTML code. So we could do something like hello world inside here. That would be all you need to do to get started. If we did everything correctly, if we named it correctly, this should now be loaded for our infobox block type. The connection that Kirby makes is done by this name here. So if this matches with the definition in the type definition in your inbox YAML, then everything should work correctly and it should be loaded. Yes, and as we can see, it really does that. It puts the hello world paragraph inside our blocks editor, and it works. It's not super useful. It doesn't really do much. It doesn't really give us an info box yet, but we're getting started, and it's just HTML, so it's not some black magic in here. What would be the next step? We probably want to style it. That would be how do we get styles in there? How do we get CSS in there? Because so far we only have in our index JavaScript file, and that is being loaded, and that's fine, and it's creating HTML. But how do we get CSS in there? That's the next file we need to create. Kirby can, for every plugin that you create, you can also provide an entry point CSS file that Kirby will then load into the panel and use for additional styling. So that's the next step. We create a new file, call it index. Just messed it up. Let's do it like this. Open it up, and now we can put any kind of style, additional style that should be loaded by the panel in here. It could totally override anything in the panel, but what we want to override now, or what we want to add to our block is custom styles for our block type. So we only want to address that. How do we get access to that? Of course, one way to do it, we could add a class name here and then use that class name in order to create the CSS style. Or a better way is to use what Kirby already introduces, because every block in the blocks field already has certain kind of CSS selectors that you can use. So let's have a quick look at the HTML structure that is being created by Kirby. So you can see that here we have already a wrapping div around our block, which is called, or which has a CSS selector called kblock type infobox. So we can use that one in our CSS file to get better access for styles. This is great because it's giving us a clear scope for our CSS, and we don't have to add anything extra on top of it. And as a first step, we could make it super ugly and just make sure that the background is red. Nice. So now we have access to styles. We can apply our own styles, and we can make sure that it's only happening for our new block type here. Cool. But again, it is not really what we wanted, because we don't have any dynamic content in here. It is just a string that we defined, and that is not super useful. How do we get access to the fields and the content in those fields that we have before, or that we have defined before? By using the blocks keyword here and creating components like this, Kirby injects a couple things into your components. Let me remove that background again, because it's kind of annoying. So one way to look at this and see what is all in our component, it is a bit of a hack, but I kind of like to look at the code that is available here by looking at the props that are available in my component. So this is a keyword that is available in Vue.js, which gives me all the properties that are passed onto the block. And I'm using our code component to display it a bit more nicely. So this is what our block gets if you inspect it, if you inspect the data behind it. And you can see we have a content object here, we have a field set object with all the fields that we defined, and we have a couple more things like the disable state, the endpoints, API endpoints. So it's getting very specific here in those parts, but the important part here is the content. So if we access that like here, we can have now full access to the fields that we defined before. And if we open our drawer, let me make this a bit bigger, and I start typing, you can see that this is fully dynamic and reactive, and we have full access to that within our preview component. And this is exactly what we want, because now we can start working with it. Inside our component, we don't really need to go through the props keyword again, because Vue.js is already exposing those props to us without using props before that. So content is totally accessible like this. You just have to, it's just an easy way to inspect what is all available in that big props object. So we have content here, and from content we can then of course use also content text and content type, the fields that we defined in our blueprint before. Again, this is really just a trick. The code wrapper component is really just a trick in order to inspect this more easily. Once you know what you want to use, you can do it like this. So this is something that you have to know just when you get started. You have the content object. From the content object, you can access all the fields that you defined in your blueprint folder. If you define in your blueprint file, if you define a new blueprint field in there, it will also become available in the content object. And from there on, you can display it. And now it starts to get dynamic. Now we can show all kinds of data that we want to show. And of course, we can also style it. And this is where it really starts to get interesting, because now we can make it, turn it into something more beautiful and something more representative of what we want to show. But again, it's still not really editable. This is not the idea that I have for a component that should feel like a rich text editing experience comparable to the heading or to the text paragraph, to the text block. So the next thing from here on, let me clean this up a bit, it looks weird. The next thing from here on would be to use an input and send events to our blocks field and tell the blocks field that something has been updated and that it should know about those updates. Straightforward is, we could turn this into divs, and a straightforward way would be a simple text input. We don't have to take care of, or we don't have to know about any weird components so far yet. We can really just use plain HTML in all those previews. And what I'm going to use is a simple input, text input. And one way to get started is to put in what we already have in content text here into the value. And as you can see, I'm making a difference now between the type attribute and the value attribute. And this is another thing that you have to learn about Vue.js when you get started with it first, because this is how Vue.js decides between static attributes and dynamic attributes. By adding a colon before it, you basically tell Vue.js that the value of this attribute is going to be dynamic. It's going to be a JavaScript thingy. It's coming from the component. Otherwise, if you don't do that, it would just put content text, literally content text, as the value of the input. As soon as you do that, it will go to the content object and use the text field value as value here. Doing this changes nothing because it is an input field and it looks plain, it's unstyled. but it does what we expect it to do. So we now have an input and we can start writing. And this is really cool. But you might already guess that nothing really will happen because we haven't told Kirby or the panel or the blocks field in this case that something has changed. So if I open the drawer again, you will see that this is still the original text that we had before, and the changes that I just made in the input haven't propagated here yet. Nothing has changed so far. And if I write something in here, changes, you see in the background already that the value is already overwritten again. So we don't have two ways to react on changes yet. And this is quite clear because we only have the input, but we don't send events from the input yet. So we don't listen to input changes. And we can do this with the input event in, not just Vue.js, but the input event in the HTML input element. And this is the way how you add event listeners to HTML elements in Vue.js. With the add prefix, you tell it this input event should be now added to my input element. This is again using native HTML event listeners. So it's the input event. You could also use the click event or the focus event, doesn't really matter. Vue.js, this is just really a shortcut in Vue.js to say, okay, now I'm binding this event listener to the input element here. So now we have to do something on input, and we could write some code in here, some JavaScript code, or we can delegate this to a method, which in my opinion is always a bit cleaner. So what I want to do is to call an onInput method whenever something is being changed in the input element. Since this is a Vue component, we can now define additional methods for this component, which is done in the methods object. So here we have now a space where we can define additional methods for this component. So we can define our input method. This input method, since it is really just adding an event listener, or it's just really reacting to an event listener, will get an event object as first argument. This is exactly like it would be if you would add this event listener into your DOM by using element add event listener. And so this means all of this again is completely native JavaScript DOM handling stuff or event handling stuff. So we can do something now with this event. We could also start by putting it into the console by using the event target value, just to see if it's working. If I go to the console, or if I open the console and I start typing, it should now log my changes. So it's all working as expected, and now we can do something with it. So the next step would be to send the changes that we just made forward to the blocks field. And as I said before, by defining blocks like this, Kirby will automatically inject a few things into our component. It already injected the content object into our component, and it also predefined an update method in our component. And we can use that now. So this means we can call the update method like that. And the idea of the update method is that you now pass in the changes to the content object. And you don't have to redefine the entire content object to do this. You only have to specify the fields that should be updated. So in our case, we want to override the content of the text field here. So we only need to say, okay, the text field now changes, and the text field's value should be whatever the event target value is. This will now send an update event to the blocks field telling the blocks field the text has changed for this particular block. Let's see if that works. Whoops. Hello world. And then, yep, it's working now in two ways. and going back. So it's now working in two ways. We can change stuff in the drawer, we can change stuff in the blocks preview, and it's all working as expected. So this is super cool. If I also wanted to change the type, I could totally do it like this, and change the type to success, for example. So whenever I type, this is already success, so there shouldn't be any useful change. So it has been success. If I'm typing now, the type should have changed to alert. This is not super useful, but you get the idea. If I have now another element in my blocks preview that would change the type, I could totally do it like this. Okay, cool. So now we have that, and we know how to style it, and we know how to react on events and send events back to the block. So this is really nice. One thing that I want to do now as a next step is to change the styling depending on the value of the type field, because that's something that seems useful for such an info box. It should be red or green or blue or yellow or orange or whatever, depending on the type. So I can totally do this by using my type field that I've used here and the value of the type field. And what I like to do in this case is to use a data attribute, and I'm going to add this to the div that is wrapping around the input. So here I can say data type. This is a dynamic attribute again. By adding the colon, I will now put in some kind of dynamic stuff in here. And so what I want to do is to use the content type field, and whatever the value of that is should now be used as the data attribute. So let's see if that works. If I'm going back here and inspect the code, you see that the data type is now alert. And if I edit that, it's now notice or success or info. Really cool. That means this is a super easy way to change the styling now depending on whatever is stored in here. So let's add a bit of styling. We already started like this. We don't have the div anymore. I changed the paragraph anymore. I changed it to a div. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to give it a default background. So now you could define your own colors here. What I like to do is to use the colors that we have in our design system. And the default one should be our blue color. And let's take a rather bright shade of it. So that would work well as a contrast to the text. Let's add a bit more styling and now also to the input. And to one thing that I want to do is I want to disable the focus style. This is normally not okay. But in this case, we already have a focus around the blocks, so this is fine in my opinion here. And I want to add a bit of padding. We have our own spacing system as well, so you can also make use of that. And the advantage of using our CSS variables here is that you will always make sure that everything that you do here matches our design system. How do you know about all those variables that are available? You go to lab.getKirbyCom, and then there you can find our design system. You can find font families, the font sizes, the spacing. You can find our colors. You can find our icon system. So everything is available here, and you can just pick it from there and say, okay, yeah, I'm working with those variables. Of course, this is really not something you have to do. It's just a recommendation to make sure that your block previews and everything else that you build for the panel looks consistent with the rest around it. So now this is stupid, of course. We don't just want it to be on input focus, but all the time. So here we go. And one other thing that I want to do is to apply a border radius. Again, this is also available in our lab, so you can look it up, the different border radii that are available there. And so now it starts to look like an info box. We only have defined the blue background now, so this means that we have to hook up the different data types, data type attribute values to different colors. So that would be the next step. Success should get a nice green color. And then let me switch this off that you can see all of this. Then we have notice, that would be orange. And then we have alert, and that would be red. So if we did everything correct, we should be able to switch this and change the color depending on the type. So from here on, it really starts to make fun to play around with this and modify this and just experiment with different options to preview the blocks, use the fields in creative ways to work with this. Another thing that I want to show you is how we can combine what we define in the blueprint with what we do in our block. So for example, what I really want to do is, if this is empty, I want to show a placeholder text here. So a straightforward way to do this would be to define a placeholder attribute on our input element. Placeholder, write something. Okay, straightforward. Now we have a placeholder text. I also want to have the same placeholder here in my text field. Okay, again, straightforward. Copy and paste this into my blueprint, into the placeholder option. So now this should also be available in the drawer. And it works. But as you already see, if we are looking into keeping our code dry, this wouldn't be a very convincing way to keep it dry, because now we have the placeholder. It could change here, and we would have to keep in mind that it should also change in our preview, which isn't really ideal, actually. So I showed you before that if we have a look at this huge props object for our component, you could already see that the field set definition is already available to our preview component here. But it's kind of annoying to go through this huge object to find a particular part in here, or to find the field definition in here. And just like the update method or the access to the content object, another built-in method that is available in Kirby, in those block previews or those block preview components, is a method called field, and it looks like this. And from here on, we can pull in information about the fields that we have defined in our blueprints. So, for example, I can pull in the definition for our text field. If I render that, you can see it adds this huge nasty object here again. If I wrap it into code, I can inspect it a bit more easily, and you can see now I have all the definition or all the options for my text field available in my JavaScript code, which is pretty nice, because now from here on I can access the placeholder code, and the placeholder option. And this is exactly what I wanted, because I want to pull it from the blueprint and not redefine it in my JavaScript code. I want to make sure that it's always the same between the blueprint and the JavaScript code. So this means I can, this was again just a little practice to inspect whatever is in that field. And from here on, I can now paste it into my placeholder attribute. Once more, it is important that you now turn this into a dynamic attribute, because otherwise Vue.js would really just write this out, which is not exactly what we want. We want to make sure that now I can execute JavaScript code in my attribute to make sure that whatever the result of this here would be used then as the value for the placeholder attribute. Nothing changes because the placeholder is the same. We didn't change anything so far. But if I go back to the blueprint and I change this one here, it should now also update in my JavaScript code, which again I think is really exciting, because now I have a dry situation or a dry solution to only control such options from one place. In this case, the blueprint place, which in my opinion is always the greatest place to do this, because now I have this really clean setup here for all those options and all the values that I want to define. Let me give you a quick other example for this, because this can get quite far. The options for our types are defined as a select field, and I actually think that the toggles field would be a better solution for this. Let's have a look at that. If I open my drawer, I get the toggles field. This is how the toggles field looks. It's not that much better, but I can click on each of the options already, because if I don't have too many of those, I can just display them in a single line, which is, I think, pretty handy. But there are a few more possibilities that I have here. One thing is that I can now, one important option of the toggles field is that I can change the reset option to false. This means I cannot unset any of those, so I have to define one. I cannot remove this, which I also really don't want, because I want to have one of those types set here. And another one is that I can define icons for each option. And I do it, this is possible like this. So options in general for the select field or the toggles field or the checkboxes field or the radio field, they can be defined as simple arrays of values, which then are being used as value, but also as text, as you have seen in the drawer. But we can also extend them some more. So we can say, okay, this is not just a single string. So this is an array of value and then text, for example. And then you can have different values and different texts, which sometimes is important because you don't necessarily want to have the same value stored in the field that you also want to show to your editors. That's one point. But another point here is that for the toggles field, we can also define additional icons. So I can say the info option gets a text icon, the success option gets a check icon, the notice option gets an info icon, and the alert option gets an alert icon. Again, the reference for those icons is, or those icons are available in our icon set. The icon set can be checked here, and you can use any of those icon IDs to put them into your fields. What does that do? How does that look? If I open it, now it looks a lot better, and I get an icon for each option in my toggles field, which again adds just a bit more visual reference to my field. It just looks a bit nicer, and it feels a bit nicer, and yeah, I don't know, bit more well designed. But the cool part now is, just like we did with the placeholder, we can also access the icon from our definition of those options. And this is exactly what I wanted to show you, because now this is all available in our blueprint code. We can also pull it into our JavaScript code. How do we do that? Well, we have the field method, and one way to do this is, again, to access the type field instead. And then from the type field, we can go to the options, and that would give us all the options that we just defined. By putting this into curly braces, I haven't spoken about this before when I did this the first time. You just echo whatever is in here into your JavaScript code. So now I get, again, a big bunch of elements in here, and you can see we get all the options that we just defined in our blueprint code, including the icon. Cool. So now we somehow have to compute which icon is currently activated. So which type is currently selected and what is the icon for that type. And that's quite easy to do with with a computed property. Again, this is something that is typical to Vue.js. We can define computed properties in our component within the computed object. And whatever we put here, we can define on our own. So I would say I need a new computed icon option. And now that could be some static stuff like the edit icon. And as soon as I defined this, I can print it here in my code. So now I have the edit icon here, and I can pass it to my icon component, for example. I have to make sure that this is a dynamic attribute again, because otherwise it would simply print out icon and not pass edit to the component. But once I do that, it will show the edit icon. And so whatever I compute here will then be turned into the type attribute of the icon component. Cool. So let's style that quickly, and then from there on we can try to find out how to get the right icon at this point or into this position. Back to the index file, I can go in here now and let's apply a bit of flexbox styling and align this properly. And we also want to add a bit of spacing to the right, to the left. Here we go. So now we have an icon. It's the wrong icon, but it's positioned correctly. We have the text here, and in case we would ever figure out how to put the right icon here, we would pretty much be done already with a quite useful and nice looking info box. Back to our computed properties. How do we get now access to our options again inside this computed property method? And how do we find out which icon we need to pick? First thing is we can use the field method again. This is a bit of a specialty in Vue.js again. Within our template code, we can leave out this. We don't have to define this field. We don't have to define this content or this on input. Vue.js is already taking care of that for us. But whenever we work in a computed property or in one of those methods, we have to use this to reference other parts of the component. So to get access to our type fields, we use the this field method with an argument of type, can get access to the options, and now we need to find the right option. How do we do that? With the find method. The find method is an array method in JavaScript. It's native JavaScript. The options is giving us an array, and now we can find the item by item value, and that should be the same as content type. Let me make this a bit bigger so you get to see what I'm doing here. So now it's finding the right option, and from that option we can then get the icon. So for example, if the currently selected type is info, it will go through the array until it finds the value, the item with the value info, and then it will pick the icon option from that. I hope this is easy to understand. So now we are here with a working icon, and if we change it here, it will jump around and do whatever we wanted it to do. Here is some important info. Cool, so now we have a truly editable info box right in our blocks. We can drag it around, we can delete it, we can change it, we can edit it inline. We could now change the type of field that we are using here. We could use our writer in order to make sure that it also that text can also make bold or italic. We could even extend this further and make this a drop down to make sure that we can change the type directly inside the info box. This is also possible. So from here on, we have all kinds of options, additional opportunities to make this even nicer and easier to edit. Whew, that was quite a lot. As I said before, it is a bit of a crash course because we don't have any plugin videos yet. If you have read through our plugin docs, all of this might be already familiar to you. The next steps from here on would be to turn this into view components. This is another thing that you can do as soon as your block code gets too complex, or any kind of panel plugin that you're building gets too complex. You can turn this into view single file components. That is something that I really would recommend to do as soon as you find yourself messing too much with the template option here and the template code is getting nasty, because this stuff here is not super easy to read, and view components give you a lot of extra options to make this nicer. In order to do that, you can use the brilliant Kirbyup plugin to get started, to give you a build process, because this is basically the decision that you have to make. So far, we have built this completely without build process. As you see, I'm really just editing a simple JavaScript file. Nothing is being processed yet. Nothing is minified or parsed or whatever. So if you want to work with single file components in Vue.js, you have to do that. And then you have to have a build process and you have to have a development process. And Kirbyup is a great way to do that. If you stay tuned a bit more in this video, and this crash course hasn't left you like completely overwhelmed already, I'm going to show you how to do that in the next step. This is, again, like many things in Kirby, something where you can start really simple. As I showed you before, you can start with a really simple component that is easy to understand, that is just a bit of HTML and just a bit of CSS. But if you want to take it to the next level, you can keep on adding and make it more complex and more shiny and whatever. But then you also have to dig into a few more things to learn. So for everyone who's just overwhelmed, don't feel embarrassed or whatever. Don't feel ashamed. It's no problem. You can keep coming back to this all the time. Adding stuff to the panel really enhances it in so many ways. But you can do this step by step. You don't have to do it all at once. For everyone else, let's just move this over to Kirbyup. So again, what is Kirbyup? Kirbyup is a great tool by Johann Schoplich, whom you might have seen on the Discord channel as well, or in the plugin Discord channel as well, or with his brilliant recent plugins like the Copilot plugin. He's doing a lot of great stuff, and he has come up with this tool that helps you get a really nice development workflow if you want to work with single file components. Let me show you how. So going to our plugins, to our plugin folder, so far, as I said, it is all just really plain JavaScript, plain CSS. As a first step to move forward with Kirbyup, we have to install Kirbyup. So let me open this in the terminal. And one thing you can do is you can either install it globally, or you can install it locally with npm install Kirbyup as a development requirement or dependency. Will take a while. Here we go. So this would now add a package.json to our plugin. It looks like this. And that would be step 1. And step 2 would be to copy over the scripts. So there's a dev script and there is a build script. We need both of those. And now we have to define where our source code is. So far, our existing code for our plugin is in the index.js in the main location, and Kirby needs it to be here. Kirby will always load it from the main plugin folder. So this means as soon as we are going to work with Kirbyup, and Kirbyup will then parse the file or work on the file for us, we have to move it somewhere else, because then Kirbyup will pick the source code from there and then run the build process through it and create the final version of the index.js here for us. So once we move over to Kirbyup, we have to move our source code to somewhere else. As you can see, Kirbyup suggests to put it into a source folder, so this is exactly what we are going to do. We are going to put it into a source folder, and you can grab your index.css and your JavaScript file and just move it over. Okay, this is all you have to do in order to get started. The next step would be to start the dev process. So we run the dev process. Kirbyup will now pick the index.js that we just moved to the source folder and create a new index.js for us. While the dev mode is running, it will create this module.js for us. Once you run Kirby build, once you are happy with the plugin, it will create a final index JavaScript file for us. Nothing really changed so far. If we reload the panel, it should still be working. The CSS is gone, but we are going to fix that in a second. But the JavaScript code is still working as expected. Okay, why do we even do this? What's the advantage of this? Let me show you. Going to the source folder and into the JavaScript file, you see, as I said before, our component is getting more complex. We have computed properties now, we have methods now in there. There might even be more methods and more computed properties, and the template code will grow and keep growing. And at a certain point, it grows out of this simple format here. So what we can do with this is we can copy all of this and cut it and move it into its own file. I would always suggest a components subfolder here and then put in a new Vue.js file in here. Going to explain this in a second. Sorry, this is a bit of chaotic situation now where I have to move this over and I completely messed it up. So we are just going back and I'm taking a step back to get this straight. So, okay, what are single file components? The idea behind single file components in Vue.js is that you have your template code, your JavaScript code, and your CSS code all in one place. And I'm going to show you in a second why this is pretty awesome. Vue.js has this custom Vue format here, this file format, which isn't really understandable by your browser. This is why we need Kirbyup. Kirbyup will take that Vue.js code or those Vue.js single file components and convert it back into simple JavaScript, into simple CSS for your browser to understand. Okay, that's the theory behind it. Now, how do those single file components look like? They have a template part where you put your HTML code for your component. Then they have a script block where you put your JavaScript part, and then you have a style block where you put your CSS. So far, so good. So what we can do now is we can turn our component that we just created in a pure JS environment into those blocks by cutting out the template code first. This is what I should have done initially, and pasting it here, and then putting all your script elements or your computed properties and your methods into such a default module. Clean this up a bit. That's basically it. And as a final step, we can now go back to our index CSS, take all the CSS that we had and put it into the style block. The CSS file from here on is no longer needed. We can delete it. And our original JavaScript file now looks a bit broken as well. So we can remove all of this. And now we have to get our component code in here somehow again. And this is done by importing our info box code from the file that we've just created. It's in the components folder in the infobox.vue.js file. So now we have created this new constant here, and we can simply hand it over to the infobox thing. So we just recreated what we already had, which sounds a bit weird maybe, because where's the huge advantage so far? It's not infobox, it's not input box, it's infobox. You will get that in a second. So now we have everything in one place, which is super cool. And we also have the template code in a way more readable manner, and we can work on this more easily. And we also have our styles down here, and we can keep them all in one place, which is super useful if you work with multiple components and you want to keep all of this super tidy. Okay, I hope you're still following my little detour here. Everything's working. As you can see, Kirbyup now pulled in the stuff from our single file component, including the CSS, and created what we already had. So far, the changes aren't really drastic because nothing really happened to our preview. It looks exactly the same. Now comes the magic part, because Kirbyup is running a dev server for us in the background. It's hot module reloading changes whenever we do something. So for example, if I decide I want to make changes to my CSS and I want to make this darker, I can now play around and changes are live reflected in the panel. So it's giving you this really nice developer experience out of the box when you work on your components, and you can make changes a lot quicker and a lot more in a lot cleaner fashion. And of course, you can now work with imports as well. So if your code gets even more complex, you can import code from various places and put it all into your components. And of course, again, as well here, if your components get bigger, this is the perfect way to do it. Now, once you're done and you are happy with the result, the big difference now to the solution that we had before with the simple JavaScript files is that you now have to run npm run build to finalize your plugin, to make sure that Kirbyup will now put everything into the index.js and the index CSS. And as you can see, it's minifying the results. It's putting the index CSS back there. It's also minifying your your CSS file. And now your plugin is fully done. It's working and it's doing exactly what you want. And whenever you want to pick it up again, you run npm run dev again, and you're ready to go. You have hot module reloading again, and it's all super awesome. Whew, that was really a lot this time for this video. I hope you have followed until the end. For those who are more interested in plugin development, I will try to come up with more videos like this where I give you more examples how to build such plugins. As I said before, it's the advanced stuff, so it gets a bit more complicated here. Always trying to break it down into steps. Let me know how you liked it. Let me know in the comments if you have suggestions or questions, or if you have new ideas for new videos. I'm always happy about those. I sound like a YouTuber at this point, but please hit like and subscribe if you are happy about those videos and if you want to see more. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. See you. Bye bye.